You know we're going to be just as weird in this new series because it's a new series, but we're here to be weird. Justin's dancing in the background with us. Oh, welcome, my friends. We are live with a technically brand new series, but it's still a lot of the same stuff we've been talking about. We just had this recognition that the Inner Tapestry series might not share with our listeners what the heck that means versus this new title, Breaking the Barriers, I think says exactly what Red and I are here to do. And we're going to do that through continuing to have these really in-depth conversations about shadow work, about breaking through the bullshit, all of that same stuff, just in a slightly new format with pretty rebranding, shadow and light themed, you know how we do. So you can expect a lot of the same themes, conversation styles, etc. But we're also going to be making it a little bit more bite-sized because we tend to cover a lot of stuff. So today, we're going to actually start with the topic of this show, the new rebrand, Breaking the Barriers. And I'd like to just start by us introducing ourselves as we always do, but with really a little bit of a story layered in here about why we came to this path in the first place. So I came to my healing path through my own trauma, really, and understanding that what I had gone through was inviting me to help other people navigate similar things, because unfortunately my reality matched way too many people's reality, and I knew that I needed to do something about it. So that kind of was the thing that kicked off my path. So I'm Safrianna Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide, and now I help visionary entrepreneurs step into their dreams and get out of their own way so that they don't live in burnout and keep themselves small. That's what I do these days. Red, what about you?
Well, my name is Red Moon Eagle. I'm a psychic catalyst, a teacher, and a healer. And how I came to this spot is a long, sorted, convoluted story all over the place. I do also have a fair amount of trauma, but I would say that one of the things that brought me to this particular place is that I've been doing shadow light work with people for decades. And in doing shadow light work with people for decades, one of the things that I spend so much time doing is breaking down those barriers that people think are this monolithic thing, or the monster under the bed, or the fear baby that they carry with them, or all of these manifestations of how we hold on to trauma and how we hold on to that paradigm. And I can't say I'm exempt from that. I've definitely done my own journey, but one of the beautiful things I love about this particular work is helping people know that they're not alone in this, and we're not. So,
Yes.
yeah.
We are so not alone in this work, but yes, that's a big barrier that we think exists, is that we are all alone. I would say that is
Yeah.
one of the biggest things that you and I are going to break with people is we're building community, right? We're building this sense of like, it's okay to walk through this shadow journey. So as we get into this, you know, we're both healers. We've had a lot of spicy talks in the Inner Tapestry series. We had an episode all about navigating the bullshit and what a lot of the bullshit narratives in society are. We're going to circle back to a lot of that throughout this series, I'm sure, but I'd like to anchor into just personally some of the barriers that we have broken through. So we're going to get into today, like what some of those barriers look like that people experience, but like our own barriers. So when I think of what the major barriers I've broken through are, it is that generational trauma barrier that I experienced, right? My family system had a very big trauma narrative, and I thought for a long time that was just going to be it. That was my fate. This is what I have to live with. So I broke through that. I broke through the barrier of getting out of domestic violence as an adult. This is a huge barrier that
Mhm.
not a lot of people talk about, but unfortunately,
Right.
many of us have to break free from.
Yeah.
And then the barrier of building my own business in a capitalistic system that wants us to work for other people for pennies and, you know,
Hmm.
suffer and really drag ourselves down into unhealth and burnout. So breaking free from that barrier was huge, especially after the trauma of trying to build a business once and it being in that domestic violence relationship. So like
Right.
getting where I am now, doing what I'm doing, I had to break free from quite a few things. So what would you say are some of the biggest barriers you've broken through to get where you are today?
Um, the first thing that comes off the top of my head is my frustration that time didn't hurry up so I could start doing my work sooner, right? Um, because I've known since I was a small child, like the dark time was a thing, it was coming, and my real work wouldn't be able to start till then. Now I'm in I'm in my 50th year decade, right? So that decade is very much halfway or not quite halfway point, depending on which psychic you talk to. I'm apparently going to live forever. But there is this one big barrier I would probably say is the familial intergenerational trauma piece. I also have that in common with you. Um, Only I did know that I didn't have to take it with me. I just couldn't, for a long time, figure out what that looked like,
Mm.
um, because I felt that there was somehow maybe more I needed to be responsible for in that family. And it took me a little to kind of go, you know, I love them, but I don't have to carry them. And that was a really tough thing. Um, I didn't go through the same domestic violence issues that you did. I had some different ones, and I am happy to share these stories because I'm very transparent with them. But when you deal with anything that has to do with domestic violence, strangulation, physical, emotional abuse, all those things carry weight, and it was a barrier that I had to, and it was decades of working on it. And this is one of the things that I would love to talk about in the future is also like you don't wake up one day and say, okay, this is my barrier and I'm going to break it today. It took me decades to work through some of these things. And I thought I was on the fast track. Come to find out, I was on the slow track. Um, but the other thing is the societal barriers, not just of building a business in capitalism, but also the societal barriers of people's perception of women.
Mm-hmm.
And that part is the one that I am breaking every rock I can find with the biggest sledgehammer because I've known for a long time that it takes the community to help that become that reality. And the Me Too movement was definitely
Mm-hmm.
a wonderful thing. But this is a continuation of our mothers and great grandmothers' work.
Yeah.
And my mother's generation fell down. They gave up. They went, oh, we had Roe v. Wade passed. We just can like now slide.
If only,
And
right?
they quit working. They quit working, and they did not teach us how to continue the work. And that's a big barrier that I'm working on right now. So I would say those are probably the influential barriers for me.
Yeah. Ugh. And all like see the overlap between us, right? And the slight differences. And I think that just so many more of us are walking around with these invisible barriers that people just have
Mhm.
no idea. But then there are very visible barriers in the world right now. There are these literal systems in place to keep certain kinds of people from accessing certain things. And so
Yeah,
that is what this program is ultimately about, is unpacking whether it's the barrier of knowledge, right? The barrier of access, the barrier of literally not knowing something about yourself. Like all of those
yes,
things we're going to be working on, and speaking up against the bigger things that are in
yeah.
society that you and I can't fix on our own, right? It takes building the
No,
community, it takes building
yes,
the circle. I saw a meme this morning that was like, tell me the real reason for polyamory. It's like one of those memes where it escalates and like there's more satisfaction in the meme showing like, yeah, we're getting closer, right? And one was like,
yeah.
I'm in polyamory for the sex, and the face is like meh. And then it was like, I'm in polyamory for, I don't remember what the middle one was, but it was something about, oh, for like for loving multiple people, and it was like meh. And then it was like, I'm in polyamory to have a group large enough to cause a rebellion.
Yes,
And I'm like,
yes.
there we go. So
There
it
we
does
go.
take community to break down these
Yeah.
barriers. So let's talk about what some of those look like? So we've got societal barriers, emotional, spiritual, systemic, and we've already mentioned a couple of them, right? Domestic violence, assault, any form of physical trauma against one's body or emotional trauma is going to create an internal barrier, and sometimes external ones, towards accessing self-love, self-awareness, safety in our bodies, etc.
Yep.
So anything you want to say about that?
I would say part of the barriers, you mentioned it briefly, but the unknown barrier, like the barrier is there, but you can't articulate it. For me, that would have been the autism ADHD I've had my whole life. And there are so many people out there, especially women, that are not being heard and not being taken care of or allowed to have that space with their disabilities, no matter what the disability is. Because when you have neurodiversity, you also have physiological disabilities that often come with it. And the women's ability to self-advocate in medical situations, we are gaslit left and right.
Yeah.
And often by other women who are go through the medical system in isolation and feel like they have to talk about flight and fight, right? So that's just a small example of the bigger systemic unseen scene, right? Like we all know it's there, we all encounter it, but nobody wants to talk about it enough to change it, right?
That's all of what we're going to be talking about, is like the stuff that no one is talking about. And that's when we're silent, nothing can change. And I think so many of us have this fear that if we speak up, right, we're going to be unalived. We are going to be attacked, ridiculed, whatever, right? Or literally that escalation of harm. But, you know, so many of us, I love that you went right to this disability piece, because I've been recognizing I have my own barrier recently where I have invisible disability. I have chronic illness, and I treat myself like I don't because everybody else treats me like I don't, because they can't see it, right? And that's a huge barrier, because if we are operating, if we're ignoring and we're pushing beyond something that really exists, it's going to create other problems, right? You know, for me, it creates the flare, and then I'm down for a week because I can't do anything because I've pushed myself. So that's a huge thing, like how these disabilities or invisible illnesses or brain wirings, you know, show up in these different ways. Yeah.
You know, I talk about it a lot, and we've touched on it in other shows. So go back and listen to all the other 23 if you're looking for something to listen to and you're bored. I talk about the wheel of self-care, or the 5 pillars of self-care, and I talk about them ad nauseum, because I'm not talking about the code word for going out and spending $150 on a spa. I'm not talking about irresponsible spending or other unhealthy things. I'm talking about looking at what your foundation for self-care is. And especially if you have one of those unseen disabilities. I have unseen disabilities, you have unseen disabilities. And because of who we are perceived as in the world, I feel like you and I are both seen as very strong, very capable, solution oriented. We get stuff done. We get a lot of stuff done in a really short amount of time, where everybody else is like, holy shit, how did that happen? But the downside of that is, if we're not managing that ourselves, nobody else is going to manage it. They're going to keep expecting all of the everything all at the same time right now, immediately. And I do a lot of, and I know you do too, like, okay, yes, I would like to do this, but I want to be honest, like I can't, or it's not going to be in a week, or it's not going to be in a month, it's going to be a while. And that's got to be okay.
Communicating our limits with people, right? Because we can end up creating our own blockages in so many ways. And so much of that, like, I'm so guilty of it being based on agreeing to things that I don't really have the capacity for. I've gotten so much better over the last year with that. But it's still something I'm unhooking from. And I think many of us are, that we literally end up harming ourselves by taking on too much, to where we've got so much stuff stacked around us that we can't move forward in what we want to do.
And I think there's another piece in that. We stack it beyond what we can do, and we want to have that community that will help us with it. But we don't often know how to navigate within community. We don't know what that really looks like. We're having to relearn this as a society because we do not know what it looks like. I would say that our great, maybe fifth or sixth great grandmothers a while ago probably had a better idea of what was going on, because if you wanted to communicate with your family that had moved from Georgia to Nebraska, you had to write letters. You had to write those letters, or you had to put pen to paper to communicate. And now we have the ease, right, of modern technology. So we don't talk to our children, we don't talk to our aunts and uncles because they are so quick to reach, in theory, that we don't make the effort. And that's just a small example of within families, but you see that out in the bigger world. Like, I know who my neighbor is on each side of my house, but I don't know the neighbors on the other side of them.
Yeah.
And I know that I don't. I've actually gone and knocked on doors to try to deliver things, and then they're not home. And so I have tried to branch out. But that's an example in our world that if I don't know who my neighbors are, who am I going to call if I lock myself out of my house? Or, like, what are your resources in the touch it, feel it, taste it, see it, smell it world?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what that looks like. So when we're extending past our invisible illness capacity, I have I call people all the time. I'm like, "Hey, I can't do this. Can you help me with this?" Like, "Hey, I can't do this. Can you help me with this?" And sometimes the other person is like, "No, I can't." I don't take offense to that. I just go to the next person
Right.
because I'm like, I really do need help. I tell people all the time, I don't ask for help unless I need it, but I'm learning to rely on needing it more. And that's something I'm learning, right?
Yeah.
We all learning how to do this again. You're learning how to do it. I'm learning how to do it. I know so many people out there in the world that are like, I don't know what this community thing looks like. And how do I rely on people, and how do I make sure it gets done, and what are my touch points? And
Yeah.
boy, we got a lot of stuff to work on.
We got so much stuff to work on. Yeah, there's like several things coming up for me here, right? Because the community piece is a huge barrier for many of us. We did not get educated on how to be in
No.
relationship. For the most part, I know very few people. Actually, I don't personally know anyone. I'm just going to say it because that's the fact. I don't personally know anyone who was raised in a family system where they taught things like emotional intelligence and
Right.
nonviolent communication, talking about your feelings, self regulation. It was go to your room, or it was shut up, or it was do that on your own, or I don't want to hear it, or, wipe that expression off your face, don't cry, like all of these messages, instead of
Yep.
how do we be in community and co-regulate
Yep.
and connect, right? Like these collaborative dynamics. Instead, we carry this legacy of individualism in most
Mm-hmm.
modern societies. There are some, and especially societies that are still in their indigenous roots, that are so built
Yeah.
on community and that mutual
Right.
support. But then you look at like the United States, no, not one
No.
little bit.
I was told as a kid that I would learn to socialize, I would learn to be in community in school. And school was this hierarchical, literally the most cutthroat environment you can throw a sensitive child. And I will say that I was the sensitive child. And it throws you in this environment of, instead of collaboratively working, it's who's going to be the strong leader and who is going to be the person that runs the show
Mm-hmm.
and who are the followers.
Yeah. And that hierarchy, oh my gosh, like talk about a barrier. Hierarchy is, I would argue, one of our biggest issues in society, because the
Yes.
idea that any one person or group of people could be better than or more worthy, valuable,
Yeah.
whatever it be, like is so false.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yet I hear it all the time, like in my own family system, in my own friend groups, like, my voice doesn't matter because I'm not here on the ranks. Like I need a higher rank, so to speak, in order to, do this. And
Yeah.
that is not true. It's not
No.
true at all. And I it's this us versus them that has really been built to support everything that's happening in modern society.
Yeah, I think that there is a big missing piece with how we look at what we think we're teaching about community with children. Um, I think that controversially, one of the best decisions I ever made was to live on the reservation with my kids when they were small. They got to see something different.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's influenced them in ways that they don't realize as adults.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I saw some amazing experiences that they both had that I know enriched their lives. And there is something about how our Western culture has toxicified what hierarchical systems, and it creates these huge barriers of, I mean, I'll use domestic abuse as a really good example that, okay, so we get somebody out of a domestic abuse situation, we put them in a halfway home, and then where's the therapy? Where are the services? And in some places, like there isn't a place set up in the community for them to go. They end up going right back to their abuser.
Yep.
So, and then you get people who, again, these systems that people think are there to be helpful, but they don't understand the stigma, and they'll go, well, why don't they connect with their church? Well, not everybody is Christian and goes to a church.
Right.
So you're automatically dovetailing and pigeonholing a person's, your perception of what a solution is. And having worked with churches, unfortunately, some churches are very penalizing towards people with domestic abuse,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually encourage the victim to go back to their abuser. I've actually witnessed this happen and a death come of it. So we can't not talk about, we cannot afford, I've said it for months now, we no longer have the privilege to be quiet and to assume that somebody else is going to do the thing. We all have the responsibility to connect with people, create communities, and solve the problems ourselves.
Yes.
We do not have the choice. We don't have the privilege anymore because we gave that up.
Yeah. And the thing about all of this is that when one barrier exists, when there's like one level of blockage, more are going to follow
Oh,
because
yeah.
energy can't flow, right?
No.
So
No.
what that really looks like is, let's just keep with the domestic violence example. So someone's in a domestic violence situation, they're trying to get resources to get out, but because they are traumatized, exhausted, burnt out, just trying to be in survival mode, they get sick, right? And then that compounds, and then suddenly they can't work. Now they don't have the resources to even try to get out because they are sick. Oh, now the healthcare system is involved and it's not really taking care of them. So that's another compounding stress that's now on top of it. And so when there is one barrier, there are likely going to be more. And we see the major barriers that exist right now mostly have to do with gender, with race or ethnicity. And there's this weird religion piece. I want to go back to that because we are seeing an increase in Christian nationalism, which is spouting that is the one way to think,
one and only way
to exist in the world, right? And that's most definitely not the case because there's all kinds of ways to exist in the world. And so when that becomes a barrier, if you don't believe exactly this way, you will be marginalized, penalized, attacked, whatever, right? That's a barrier we cannot afford as a collective to allow to be built to completion, because it's trying to be built right now.
Yeah, it is trying to be built, and it's been going on for decades. And one of the things that, and I'm going to point a finger at the baby boomer generation. I'm 100% kind of angry at them, and I'm going to admit that, because the baby boomer generation reaped the benefits of being able to vote, being able to go out and have a career, and they were like, okay, it's here. We don't have to worry about that anymore. We can worry about these other things. And the next 3 generations after them, fourth generations, depending on how you count and when you were born, you have people that were not taught, right, the skills of how to build community in a healthy way. Their parents didn't have it anyway. So anyway, but you add on top of that this overwhelm, this anxious overwhelm, this development of extensive technology. So more interconnectedness, a smaller globe, and you have generations of people who want to hold on to the old way, even though the new way is clearly moving forward with all of this technology. And you have this overwhelm, anxiety, people who haven't been taught skills. We have a huge dumbing down of the education system, which I witnessed as a teacher. It was awful. And you add all these things together, and it's not really a surprise. You have all of a sudden this trad wife or Christian national perspective. I had a conversation with somebody randomly at the co-op. I walked by, and she's like, "Oh my God, I love your dress." I wasn't wearing this one. I was wearing a different one. And she was like, "Oh, I just love these traditional trends that are coming through. Where did you get this outfit?" And I said, "First off, I am not part of a trend. These are my clothes. And two, I do not subscribe to traditional trends. I'm wearing what is comfortable to me." And she goes, "Well, it makes you look more feminine." I said, "And what would you do if I told you that I don't consider myself a woman?" And she went, and I went, "I'm just asking a question for discussion purposes. You like my outfit, but what would you do with a different kind of conversation?" And she was like, "Well, I just assumed." And I went, "Exactly. I like to have in-depth conversations." And we did. We had a nice 10-minute conversation. I think I might have broken the poor woman's brain, and I
I would
apologize in
imagine you
advance.
did.
But I mean, she's literally carrying a clearly under 1 month birthed baby in a sling, which I wish I had slings available when my sons were small, because I would have used that. And she had a little girl running around beside her. It was an adorable moment, but it was also one of those moments where I took the opportunity to break the barrier of someone's assumption, because I do make a lot of my own clothes, and my style that I really enjoy, because I have to wear a brace a lot of the time for my ED, means that I gravitate towards clothing that fits my body shape naturally. So Victorian type clothing is very much, or Elizabethan, because I like that era too, or Henrician, because I like that era too, right? Like, so my love of history, my love of making things. But when we're looking at breaking barriers, I take every opportunity when someone goes, "Oh, I like your clothes. Is this for a religious thing?" Because of that whole trend thing, I go, "No, it's not religion." And it's interesting you should ask me that question. What would you think of? And then I just throw a question out that is clearly going to make their brain go
Right.
like the cartoon.
Yeah, and I mean, we need to keep doing that, and it's also, I know for so many people it's anxiety provoking. I mean, I was literally trying to get my passport the other day, and I'm with my boyfriend, not getting my passport with my spouse, getting my passport
Right.
with my boyfriend, and the guy like had some confusion because he could see the marriage certificate that I'm
Yeah.
showing my name change on, and then he sees the guy who also has this paperwork who's not got the same last name, and he's like,
Right.
and I said something, and I said my spouse will need to renew their passport too, and so they'll need to bring in the marriage certificate. And he goes, "Oh no, he won't, because he didn't have to change his name when you got married." And I was just like, ugh.
Assumptions.
And
Assumptions.
I get those everywhere, but like those
Oh yeah.
assumptions are so everywhere about everything, and they are
Mhm.
creating barriers to people being themselves, to being understood or perceived in many cases. And so let's get into the impact. When
Yeah.
we don't break these barriers, when we don't talk
Mhm.
about them, when we spiritual bypass, when we try to do the toxic positivity thing, the
Yep.
impact is not great,
No.
right? And it is,
No.
people get so bogged down, so sick, so
Yeah.
depressed.
Well, you have rising suicide rates. You have rising young people that are choosing to continue to isolate rather than to be with people because they don't have the skills.
Mm-hmm.
You have increasing health issues that come from isolation, physiological things like diabetes and chronic, you know, I have worked and have done a lot of work with coaching with toxic mold and chronic illness, and that leads into mast cell activation, that leads into fibro, that leads into MS, MCFS. Like there's so many things that happen when you're isolated, and with chronic illness that comes sometimes in conjunction with that. Not always one equals the other because there's so many factors, right? And you have people who then act out. And I'm going to speak on public shootings and these mass casualty events and the religious indoctrination that sometimes grabs people up when they're isolated and
Mm-hmm.
lonely.
Yep.
And you have young children that are going out and killing other children. You have people who are strapping bombs in their cars and driving into public places. And quote unquote, I actually heard somebody who's in their 80s say this the other day. What is our world coming to and how did we get here? And I gently said, as gently as I could, because a lot of people kind of gave up the ghost and quit participating,
Blinders, right?
right? And one of the things that's come up a couple times in conversations recently, and I volunteer with a group of organization that a lot of the members are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I'm kind of the young person there, which says something because I'm not all that young. And one of the things that one of these older people said was, well, they're just not educated. And I was like, what do you consider educated? Right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find out where's the chink. And
Right.
this person said, well, they're not going to college. And I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true because we have had violent offenders go to college. They're graduated with master's degrees. I believe somebody who shot somebody recently might have had a advanced degree of some kind, you know? Um, and you're making an assumption that education solves everything. Isolation, medical issues, not understanding how to work with community. Also, people who are, I believe a military veteran did something like also do a blow a car up thing because they were mad. Educated, very pro American, right? Like we have these perceptions that anybody that does a bad thing isn't educated
That
or
that they
isn't
themselves have a
patriotic or
flaw, right?
right, that there's a flaw in their core beingness, right? And that's a barrier that I'm willing to talk about any day. Like,
Yeah.
stop this. Stop this.
Anyone
Something
can snap.
happened. Anybody can snap. I mean, unfortunately, I have had several burnouts in my life. Big, huge, complete, fall apart. I counted them up the other day and I think I'm at 8. And I went, I think that's a lot more than I thought. I mean, I thought maybe 3 or 4, but I actually like counted them up and I went, yeah, yeah, I just finished the 8th one. Let's not do this again. I don't want to ever do it again. And it was kind of an eye opener because burnout people think of is one thing. It looks like this one thing. My first 2, 3 burnouts didn't look like that. They were burnout, but they didn't look like the 8th one
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
because that stacks. And everybody has a point where they reach where they can't handle it anymore.
Yeah.
Everybody has that. And somebody who is talking about suicide, that's an edge. Somebody who's completely burnt out, that's an edge. Somebody who has mutism with their disability, which I have, that's an edge. All of these edges we all have. And I'm not going to look at somebody who blew up a bomb in a car or killed 15 people using their car as a weapon. I'm not going to say, oh my God, what an evil, horrible person they are. Where was their edge? What happened to them that tipped it? And
Mm-hmm.
where were they vulnerable to these organizations that use manipulative brain? I mean, we know the brain really well. Unfortunately, with that, we also know how to manipulate people. We know how to twist them into a pretzel to get them what we want them to do, to control
Yeah.
and take away someone's free agency. We know how to do that through
Just look at,
psychology.
yeah, I was going to say, look at like advertisement psychology alone, right?
Oh
And
my
you
God.
unpack a whole field of, we're literally teaching you how to manipulate people's psyche using color, font, word, this,
Yep.
that. So why would we not expect that a religious organization, a group of,
Government,
yeah, a government, a group of angry people
corporations.
online, corporations, right? Like, for me, something that I talk about a lot, it does not excuse it in any way, shape, or form, but is this trauma piece that everything rolls back to trauma. People that
Yep.
are doing harm to others aren't
Mhm.
happy people. They're not
Correct.
happy people running around like, I am so joyful. Let me do this awful
Yeah.
thing to, to this
No.
other person. That's not
Hurt
how it works.
hurt people hurt people.
Yes,
Period.
biggest, like that is one of the few cliche sayings I 1000% agree with, is that, because
Yep.
that is exactly it. And it all stems back to this lack of relational skills that we have
Yeah.
collectively, and why we have to talk about things, why we have to heal out loud, right? That's part of my
Yep.
mission, is the healing out loud, is sharing in my poetry books and my social
Yes.
posts and my lives, whatever, about my experiences, so other people
Mhm.
go, oh, I'm not alone in that. Right. I think so many of us genuinely think when something really bad has happened to us, or we're experiencing like a hitting that wall, we're like, oh, this
Yep.
is only happening to me because there's something wrong with me. I'm not enough, or this wouldn't be
Right.
here.
Or I should do this, or
Hmm.
I should, or I need to, or I'm
All these
ashamed
judgments.
of, or I'm afraid of, or I'm going to disappoint somebody. Like all of these things. Wow, the decisions we make. And I'm going to be controversial and I'm going to say this, that I understand the role of organized religion in history from many different aspects. I
Hmm.
totally get it. And I can be compassionate and understanding towards that. And I'm going to say it out loud. Religion is a cult. I don't care which one you pick. If somebody is telling you that you can't use critical thinking, if somebody's telling you that this is the only way to do it, you have a problem.
Yes. If anyone's telling you what to do, or you are going to be harmed in some way, right? Like, so religion, I mean, at 4 years
Sin,
old,
sin,
yes,
hell.
4 years
Oh,
old, I was literally in my bed at 4 years old crying because I had been told I was going to hell. I had no idea what that meant, but I knew it was really bad. And as a bio number with fear, you better believe I was very afraid. And that is like, there's so many of those narratives in the world right now, like, if this then that, and you have to do this or that, and we have to break that open.
yeah,
We have to free people from that story.
yes. And also, this, I don't know what to call it because I think there have been a lot of different terms. Maybe you can help me with this, but there's this, the multi level marketing,
MLMs, yes.
um, cult like Tony Robbins. There's a lot of them, but his name's come up a lot the last 2 weeks, and it makes my skin crawl. Just FYI, like when you give up your agency, what is that called, Safrianna? What is that called?
I don't, there's no word that comes to mind for exactly that, but yeah, this,
We
it
need
is
to
a,
come up with one.
we
We need
need
to
to.
identify this.
It's like an identity bypassing, right? Like, I'm
It is.
externalizing my authority to someone else instead of my own internal authority. So that
Yeah.
leads me into one of the other questions I wanted us to cover today, which is, what is the difference for us between breaking barriers and causing more harm, right? Because obviously,
Mm.
when we're going out here and we're trying to break down these systems and we're trying to do things, like the first thing that comes to mind for me, just to differentiate, is like breaking barriers can look like talking and asking questions. But if I start trying to break barriers for Black people without asking those people
Right.
what the heck they need, then I'm going
Right.
to do harm, because I'm going to be using my own lens of experience and trying
Mm-hmm.
to apply it to a
Yeah.
population I'm not a part of. So when we're breaking barriers, we want to work on our own barriers first, and we
Mm-hmm.
want to ask other people what
Yeah.
they need to navigate their own
Mm-hmm.
liberation. How can we
Yep.
support them, not do it for them?
Right.
Because when we do things for other people, also, it doesn't tend to stick.
No, because it's
Because
not
we're
their
enabling
choice.
them to just kind of stay passive in a situation.
Yeah. I mean, choice is so important. It's interesting. I do not remember. I really don't. I don't remember the first time I realized that people didn't understand choice. I just kind of, over the years, have just gotten more and more frustrated. Like, I don't understand why you don't understand that choice is everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the journey of this life is choice. And I'm not going to assume, I'm going to want to understand if you don't have choice. Please explain to me why you don't have choice and explain to me how I can help you have choice. Because to me, choice is foundational of everything in this world. And when we're breaking barriers, I think one of the things that I lean into is asking lots of questions. I actually had a session with someone not very long ago. I don't really remember which kind of session it was, but I do remember the end because the person goes, "You ask a lot of hard questions." And I went, "Yeah, I do, because either I want to understand where you're coming from. If your answer is, I don't know, I want to know why you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because where did you give up your agency of choice that you don't know the answer to that question?"
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So teaching people boundaries, teaching them the power of choice, right?
Yep.
And so many of us, just with that piece, that choice piece, a lot of it comes from that religious piece for many of us, that we don't think we
Yep.
have a choice because we've been taught not to ask
Hmm.
questions, not to critically think, right? So
Yep.
important to talk about that. But also, when we're talking about not doing harm, goes
Hmm.
back to the sustainability of the change, because we talked
Yep.
about how, a generation of women got the right to vote, and they're like, cool, we did the thing, we're going to sit down now, we can carry
We're
on.
done. We're done.
That's not
My
sustainable.
No,
We need
my
it to keep
mother
going.
told me, my mother told me literally, "We have Roe v. Wade. Don't worry about it. We'll never lose the right to our bodies now." And I was like, and the longer I've lived and then seen what I've seen, I'm like, how far in the head can you stick your, how far in the sand can you stick your head? I can't even
Yeah,
say it right. Um, Obviously pretty damn deep
pretty
if you
damn
can't be
deep.
aware that the warning signs have been here the whole time.
Yeah.
And everybody's standing around us surprised. And I'm like, why are you surprised? Were you not paying attention? When did you give up your agency of choice?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because they did. They gave up
Yes.
their choices, their decisions. They gave up the power that generations of women fought tooth and fucking nail to hold on to. I'm never going to get through one of these without cussing. I'm sorry. I
You
keep
don't
trying,
have
but it
to.
just never
This
works.
is not, this is an explicit program. This is a program where, I mean, every episode technically should have a trigger warning, because we don't bypass like this stuff. So, yes, as we come to the end of our time today, I'd want to reemphasize that that's where we're going in this program, right? So, if there are topics that you want to see us talk about, please feel
Real
free,
ones.
like real topics. Now, Shadow Side with Safrianna, where I talk about random things and it's sometimes just me, right? I'm going to do an episode on lunar hair care at some point. That is not this
Yeah.
one. That is not this
Right.
program.
That's not this program.
This
This
program,
is the hot stuff. This
I
is the
mean,
hot
I
stuff.
talk about the hot stuff in the other one sometimes, but I'll give my viewers the occasional froofy, like, yeah, let's talk
Yeah.
about gardening with the moon and whatnot. Sure. But we will be covering things in this program like blueprint contracts, like our foundational gifts again. We'll be talking more about the four sisters in the future, which is Earth, Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mintaka. For those of you who are following along with that, we'll be talking about the biological numbers and their light and shadow work. So we've got a ton of stuff that we already have lined up. But if there are specific things you want us to talk about, please let us know, because we are breaking these barriers by talking about the things that really need to be talked about. So is there anything else you want to share today, Red? You've shared so much wisdom just about like the power of choice and, you know, really like finding that inner voice again is the biggest piece of advice I think people can take away today. But is there anything else that you wanted to share?
I think mostly when you're looking at finding that inner voice and breaking down barriers, one of the things that I encourage people to really think about is this podcast, this show is supposed to be deep. It's supposed to be going to the bottom, cutting out all the shit, throwing away all the dross, and getting to the core thing. And to do that, you've got two people here who have, we're facing racism. We're facing our anti-racist, being anti-racist, facing the racism of our ancestry and history, the multicultural facets of what have brought us here. We're also facing, a lot of the pebblings that we've done through the whole show, but also we're trying to do it in a way that is conscientious, that it is uncomfortable, it is going to make you think, and it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to go, wow, I had not thought of that, and I don't know enough about that, and it's okay to be overwhelmed.
Yes.
So it's okay, because you aren't doing it alone. You're never going to do it alone. We are supposed to be doing it with each other. And if you're out there alone, tap in. I do YouTube videos. Safi does YouTube videos and podcasts. I know
we have a community space.
We have a community space. We do a lot of stuff so that anybody that comes in doesn't feel like they're doing it alone.
Yeah.
It's hard when maybe you live in a house in the middle of North Dakota on a 50-acre ranch. Like, it takes you 2 hours to get to the store. I get it. You're kind of alone, but you're not alone, because we all have a unique journey, and it's all meaningful, and we need to share those journeys so we can learn from each other.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. And I just want to conclude with a little wisdom from internal family systems, because this really, like, I have never stopped thinking of it since. It's been so many years since I gained this perspective, which is that we are all, at least those of us in the United States, I can't speak for everywhere in the world, but everybody here carries four major legacy burdens, which is sexism, misogyny.
Yep.
Specifically, when we say sexism, there is no reverse sexism, there is no reverse racism, my friends.
Nope.
So sexism is misogyny, anti-women,
yep.
Anti-femininity, the legacy of racism, so people of
yep.
color, the legacy of individualism, which is I have to do this alone, and the
yep.
legacy of consumerism. I have to have the money and buy the thing in order to be worthy, right? All of these are things that we are trying to break free from, and all of those take these immensely difficult, challenging conversations that aren't comfortable. Mm-hmm. Who wants to talk about racism? Who wants to talk about sexism? Right?
They're hard.
We don't want to do it, but I want to do it.
Well, I want to do it.
I know. I was going to say, I want to do it to break it down, but it's also this, like, no one is going into that going, oh, this is going to be the most joyful thing in the world, and I'm going to feel so, like, happy talking about it. It's the after result, when we can come together in community, when people can feel more understood and received and loved and accepted.
Yes.
That's the end result that we are looking for, and why we need to break these barriers. So
yes.
We will be back. This program is scheduled for every other Friday, unless we have something that's coming up. We're going to do a little bit of a better job just letting you all know in advance that we are going to be going live. It is 10:30 Mountain Time, so that's 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time, 11:30 Central, and then 12:30 noon p.m. Eastern Time. And then the replays are always available. So let us know if we
Always.
can support you in some way. We love you. We care about you. That's why we're having these conversations.
Yes. And thank you for joining us. This has been amazing, and I'm excited for the next season.
Yeah, so thank you all for listening. Let us know if we can support in any way. And until next time, I'm Safrianna Luna. This is my beautiful friend, Red Moon Eagle. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye for now.
2 weeks.